Curtis Samuel highlights recent Bills free agent additions this week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
Bills Mafia, welcome into another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo FamBase podcast network. My name is Justin. I'm your host today, and we have some free agency news to talk about. And before we kind of get into the moves that have happened this week for the Buffalo Bills, just kind of want to start it out with the disclaimer of, some of these moves that we've seen so far aren't the sexiest moves. We see some of these names pop up in free agency and we want all these dudes. And we're kind of in the part of the Bills' life cycle where contracts that we've given out, whether good or bad, a lot of the draft, develop, and re-sign, it's taking up a ton of our cap. And this seems to be a year where Beane is kind of taking some medicine. There's still money out there if he really wanted to go chase down somebody. We could still, the easy one, we could still restructure Stefon Diggs and kick some more of that money down the road. I think this is the year that Beane is kind of letting some of the dust settle. So we're not kind of going to be in this purgatory for like the next 5 years of just continuing to push stuff down the road. So kind of going into this offseason, Beane said himself, don't be looking for a huge splash. And we all inherently ignore that because he did tell us that a couple of years ago and went out and got Von Miller. So is the salary cap made up? No, it's very real, but there's ways to manipulate it, and Beane's been great with that. So theoretically, could that Diggs restructure happen and we do go big, big game hunting? Sure, it's a possibility, and I think we kind of saw that there was actually a report that the Bills had signed Eric Armstead. It was kind of like conflicting reports. I believe it was Ian Rappaport and Diana Rossini, both tweeting that he was agreeing to terms with different teams at the same time. But he goes to Jacksonville, and it's, in the 20s, in the 20 million range. So that's definitely a move that we would have to, finagle the cap for. But allegedly, up until the 11th hour, Beane was in on that deal. So maybe there's a surprise throughout this free agency at some point. But like I said, we did go into this offseason kind of preparing for some of the value contracts that we see Beane do. Now, if we get, through this wave of free agency, through the draft, and there's still, a spot sticking out on the board, I think Beane has put himself in a position to be able to move some things around and make a big move like that if need be. Not even factoring in yet Tre'Davious White's post June 1st designation. That's going to free up another $10 million at that point to go shopping with. So before I get to the new additions on the team, I want to start with some of our own players that we've retained. And I think it's super important to not just gloss over some of these moves, because some of these players were such big contributors. They were, kind of niche contributors that did a great job. But when we're talking about did the Bills go out and make these big moves? Well, kind of in some regards, right? It doesn't feel the same as getting, a sexy new name on the team. But keeping some of these guys around and maintaining that floor of what we were in previous seasons. I think it's so easy to overlook, but when you're talking about, on defense, we've had a top 5 range defense for several years. Players that were contributing on that defense are good to have back. Even when you look at the offense, I mean, there's a certain point of not maintaining just status quo because that team hasn't gotten it done in the last couple of years. But I think we've seen Beane do that this year, and he's made tough decisions on letting some of these veterans go that were hugely important to this team when I'm looking at, Trey White, Jordan Poyer. So I think there's kind of that balance of how much do we want to maintain the same that didn't get it done versus, there's some luck involved in football. You have to get the right bounces. You have to have the right injury health. So I think thus far, pretty satisfied with this balance that Beane has going on. So I'll start it off with player that was probably top on my list of Bills free agents to bring back was Daquan Jones. And we saw that get done and absolutely thrilled by this move. He is a player that's a little bit older, but I mean, he wasn't playing last year like he was showing age. Even when he came back from that pec injury, he didn't look fully like himself, but he was still making an impact. The defensive tackle position tends to age pretty well in the NFL. Super excited to have Daquan Jones back, playing next to Ed Oliver. Hopefully we can keep Bernard and Milano healthy throughout the season, and that's a whole great combination of players right there. Defensive tackle / defensive end. I know if you listen to this show, the wide receiver, the skill positions, those are, the sexy ones to talk about around draft time. Brandon Beane loves to build through the trenches. He's always investing there. And even with Daquan Jones back, I'm still not surprised if we go defensive tackle in the first round. There's still only like 3 players under contract. So we'll see what happens between now and the draft and, kind of where the market is shaking out on who Beane thinks he can add. If your team, wide receiver, round 1, no matter what, a couple of these re-signings that the Bills had, that they're only helping your chances. We also saw them bring back AJ Epinesa, which, again, if you've listened to the show, he's a player that I wanted back. I was really concerned that he was going to kind of price himself out of Buffalo. A team that saw what he was able to do with, limited snaps. And like, hey, this guy can be our number 1, number 2. We can give him a bunch of snaps, and we're just going to keep that trajectory going. I don't think he's, this absolute game-wrecking defensive end, but we didn't pay him to be that. On a defense that rotates, the defensive line a ton. I think he was super impactful at times last season. I think year over year, we've only seen Epinesa get better. And, he's one of these dudes that came in, throughout the COVID weird circumstances. They had him drop a bunch of weight. They had him add weight. And just kind of, if he can maintain where he was at last year, maybe improve upon that a little bit, that's a valuable piece on the defense right there. We also saw Deion Dawkins get an extension. The way he went about it was very hurtful for my emotions, my heart. He had some posts about, Buffalo always being home, and then, had a follow-up post that was like basically hinting at, he was going to be getting cut. And, very quickly after they announced the contract extension, for me, I didn't only dislike that whole sequence because I think he's, a top 10 range tackle in the league. I think he looked great last year with McGovern next to him, and I think a big part of what was holding him back from looking like the player that we thought he was kind of that revolving door of mediocrity at the left guard position. I like that. I like that phrase, the revolving door of mediocrity. So I thought he looked great last year, but even more so than that, like the financial implications of if he were to have been cut, like made absolutely no sense. So it was in my head, like it had like no cap savings for us. We just created a whole left tackle. Like what is happening right now? So love the snowman. Super excited that he's back. He's a clown. Didn't appreciate the way he did it, but in hindsight, a couple of years from now, I'll be remember that time Dawkins did that. It was hilarious. In the moment, did not enjoy it. The Bills also brought back Ty Johnson. Again, a player that I wanted back, and I don't think this is, some sort of elite signing that's gonna, set the NFL world abuzz. But I thought Ty Johnson was great almost every time he touched the ball last year. Just kind of a very different skill set from James Cook. He's just getting downhill and he's going. And he had impacts in the passing game. He had great impacts in the running game on very limited touches. And, this is a guy that, we saw the Bills add playoff Lenny later in the season, and everybody wanted to see Lenny. Everybody, Ty Johnson came in and he made it, kind of a moot point that the Bills ever added Fournette, because he was doing all the things that we wanted Fournette to do. And it was kind of Fournette was here, and then he kind of just disappeared. Ty Johnson took his opportunity and ran with it. Think we still need to add a little bit in the running back room. But this is just the Brandon Beane time of the year. He's filling the holes on the depth chart, giving himself the positional, versatility to go wherever he wants to in the draft. Then the last guy I'll talk about is Cam Lewis. Again, not a player that, is some $15-20 million guy that you get super stoked for. You've loved him on other teams your whole life, and he's finally a Bill. But I think Cam Lewis also kind of maintains that floor, and I guess it's kind of hard to say maintains the floor in the safety room because Hoyer's definitely gone. I'm not going to count on Micah Hyde being back. There's been really no whisperings of him being interested or the team being interested. Maybe I'm wrong there, and they're kind of just waiting it out and seeing what happens. But you're kind of resetting the room. So I think to me, this kind of like maintains the floor of the depth at the position. And we've seen Cam Lewis do all kinds of different roles. And is he always, great? No. But he contributes on special teams. We've seen him play cornerback. We've seen him play in the slot. We've seen him play safety. We've seen him kind of come down in the box and play like that dime linebacker type role. I think just the versatility that he brings to the table, the fact that he's been in the building, he knows the system, he's been around for a long time. Doesn't cost you a ton of money. I've seen some people, we're jumping right to, well, our starting safeties are Cam Lewis and Taylor Rapp. And honestly, with the money that both of them got, it's not really crazy money for like just straight away assuming they're starting. It's kind of like on the higher side of backup money. When you break it down, and I guess it's kind of like low end starter money when you see some of these, top end free agent safeties are signing for like $6 million average annual value. I'm not convinced Beane is done here, and I mean, when you're talking about these top safeties going for like $6 million, like I'm not ruling out that we still add two more safeties, whether one's through the draft or they're both through free agency, whatever. Hey, Bean, great day to go announce the signing of Justin Simmons. That'd be great. But yeah, I've talked about this previously, about the safety position kind of being a devalued spot in the NFL. When we see so much of this soft zone, cover two, the safety's job is kind of just to keep everything in front of them, trigger downhill. Yeah, I'm not convinced that bringing back Rep and Cam Lewis is this, just sign that's it, that we're done at safety. We're in March. The roster doesn't have to be set till late August, early September. When you look through the list of available free agents, specifically at the safety spot, there's, I don't know, 10, 15 guys that I would be excited if they announced they signed. There's still like 25 guys out there that were starters for a team last year. So I'm not worried about that spot. I think at the very least, you have some valuable depth in Lewis and Rep. I do think Rep gets a chance to start. But the floor is maintained from what your depth was last year. We'll see what happens throughout the rest of free agency and the draft. Do want to talk about some of the outside hires for the Bills. So we're going to talk about that after the break. Make sure you stick around.
Hey, this is Bills Vader. Now back to the show.
Welcome back in, and thank you again for joining me on this week's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast. As always, if you've made it thus far, I do ask that you like, share, subscribe, tell a friend about the show. Free agency is pretty crazy. We're trying to come out every week on Wednesdays. As the news happens and I can find some time, might do some, kind of breaking episodes if there's any big signings, anything like that. So make sure you're subscribed. You don't miss anything. Do want to talk on this side of the break about some of the outside hires for the Bills. And again, this isn't the splashiest, sexiest list. But it's players that I'm getting myself pretty excited for. And I want to start out with Nicholas Moreau, linebacker that came over from the Eagles. This is your depth linebacker player, right? We see Dodson go sign a pretty decent contract. I just feel like Moreau, I've talked to a friend who's an Eagles fan. He said, it sounded very similar to describing Dodson if you would have asked me before last year. Said he gets lost in coverage. He's good at getting downhill, and he'll play some special teams. So you kind of replace a one for one with Dodson. And honestly, I was sitting here this time last year panicking about the linebacker spot. We hadn't done anything. There was, is Bernard going to start? Is it going to be Dodson? Obviously, we see injuries happen, and Dodson ends up being a starter for a good portion of the season anyways. And honestly, granted, we had to make some adjustments to the defense to kind of cover up for, some of what he was lacking. But I think Dodson overall gave us serviceable play last year. And when you're looking at a depth linebacker, I'm not really all that concerned about it. And he's a name that inspires some confidence in me if we do have to go to a backup. And my kind of caveat with all this is what our coaching staff has been able to do at the position. In particular, Bobby Babich has been great at coaching up the linebackers. We saw Edmonds have his best year as a Bill the year Babich took over coaching the linebackers. As I just mentioned, ton of concern about what we were doing at the middle linebacker position last year. Bernard comes in and looks like an absolute stud. We still have Dorian Williams in the building, and he looked a bit lost at times last year. This is another guy that was, a third-round linebacker that nobody could understand why we drafted him. Sound familiar? So hopefully, behind the scenes, they're coaching up Dorian Williams, and if he has to come into the game, we see the same kind of level of performance that we saw and most of us weren't expecting from Bernard. So I trust the coaching there. Depth piece didn't cost you a ton. These are the types of moves where people are like, Beane's not doing anything. These moves matter, and we saw how much our defensive depth was tested last year. And for how many injuries we had on the defense for the season that we ended up with at the end of the year, the depth ended up performing pretty well. So excited for Dodson to go get his money. I'm good with Murrow as a replacement for him. Don't think we had to do anything super meaningful at linebacker because the pair that we have, when healthy, should be just about top 3 to 5 range in the NFL. Next, we had the addition of wide receiver Matt Collins, and the initial response I saw to this was, very, very lackluster. Nobody super excited about this, and it seems like one that had to age on people a little bit. And I think in off season where a ton of us want the Bills going wide receiver round 1, at the very least round 2, kind of anybody who's not a real needle mover brought in at the receiver position just kind of takes away from the numbers game and the urgency of receiver being in need. Because quite honestly, with the next player we talk about, the Bills could go into the next season with this receiving core, and you factor in Kincaid, you factor in some running backs, toss Knox in there, and this unit could be good to go. Do I want to see the Bills draft a wide receiver? Absolutely. And I don't think Matt Collins factors into one of your top weapons. I think this is your Sherfield replacement, and Sherfield was a guy that I was super excited about this time of year last year, and just kind of ended up being an overall disappointment. Had some moments, but also had pretty unsure hands, and when you're getting the limited rep count that you're getting, you have to make the most of those opportunities. If you throw on a Matt Collins highlight reel, he's got some circus sketches in there. Big-bodied receiver with some speed. He'll play some special teams. And like I said, this isn't your wide receiver 2 replacement. This is competition on the tail end of the receiving depth chart. Your wide receiver 5 competing with Justin Shorter. And for that context in mind, I'm good with the signing. Sherfield last year was admittedly somebody that I had seen more of because I focus a lot more on our division than the Atlanta Falcons. And honestly, that division, the Falcons themselves, it was some of the most boring football out there. I try to watch as much football as I can, at least on, the NFL Plus rewatch, just to have knowledge across the league. That whole division, including the Falcons, was pretty far down my priority list every week as I'm rewatching games. It's just such boring, terrible football. But as I, kind of familiarize myself with Hollins more, I can see the value at, wide receiver 5 position. Then rounding out the moves, this one saved for last, kind of the highlight of free agency so far. The Bills bringing in Curtis Samuel, and this is another one that I feel like wasn't received well by, I don't want to say like a ton of people. I'd say I've seen about like a 50-50 split on like the reactions to it. For me, I'm excited about the move. I think he brings a speed and playmaking dynamic to the team that it's a little bit more proven than we've seen with like an Isaiah McKenzie or Deontay Hardy. More of like a true receiver than just like a gadgety guy. What I think is interesting here is he's another guy that's not like a true boundary receiver. He did a lot of his work in the slot. So like, what does that mean with Shakir? What does that mean for like that boundary guy? And I think that in mind gets me to the point where I do still think the Bills are going to invest in receiver in the draft. I have never thought that it was going to be a round one draft pick. So if it ever was, I was going to be surprised if it was a round one receiver after we added, like a pretty solid number 2 in Samuel. Have seen Shakir's development, add, a tail end of the depth chart guy in Hollins. I'd be very surprised if it was a first round pick, unless somebody was really standing out on the board. I think this move of adding Samuel is a move that doesn't leave a glaring wide receiver 2 need going into the draft. Like we saw the year we drafted Elam, where we just kind of didn't have an answer at CB2. I think it both establishes that floor that you don't have to force it in round 1, but it also isn't such a game-changing, huge financial investment that it like precludes you from doing it. I still think that this is a spot where you have Josh Allen. You need to make sure that he's surrounded with weapons. And to me, that means investing in the receiver position almost every year. If you take a guy this year and, he busts whatever, you're talking, you probably got a year, maybe 2 left of Diggs. Curtis Samuel came on a 3-year deal. You're going to have to pay Shakir in the next couple of years. This is something where you just got to keep restocking the cupboards to me, and keep taking your swings at the plate and take one early, take one late, and just make sure that you always have talent around Josh Allen. And kind of my example for this is, again, the Elam year. We were kind of forced to take cornerback round 1. Everybody knew we were going there. But you also swung on Benford in the 6th round. And I'm still not all the way out on Elam. I still think he has a chance to be a dude. But you took 2 swings at the plate and you got a stud in the 6th round in Benford. So this is a year that I would be looking for the Bills to draft. Despite all this happening, I'd still be looking for them to draft a receiver in the 1st or 2nd round, and then take another swing on a dude in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. Like I said, keep making sure that cupboard's full. I don't think, if you get to training camp and you got to make some tough decisions in the wide receiver room, that's fine by me. But looking at the possibility of, Diggs, Samuel, Shakir, drafted guy, Kincaid, Knox, Cook. I mean, there's just the possibility to have weapons all over the place. And I know there's only one football to go around. That's fine. We can find the snaps. We can find the reps. We can, plan for injuries. What if Stephon Diggs goes down for any meaningful amount of time? What if Curtis Samuel was brought in to be your planet number 2 receiver, and God forbid he gets hurt week 1, he's going to miss significant time, and then you're back to testing the depth. Like I said, we saw the team get some more ground game going with an improved offensive line, with, Cook really coming along. And it's great. I'm glad to have, more of an impact in the ground game. That being said, you have a top 2 quarterback in the league. I'm not going to say what order they are, but he's the top 2 quarterback in the league, in my opinion. And push comes to shove, you're going to win and lose games. You're going to go as far as Josh Allen takes you. So yeah, it's important to invest on the defense and, make sure you're maintaining a good defense. Push comes to shove, if a game comes down to it and you need to win a 40-point shootout, Josh Allen's shown he's capable of doing that. Let's make sure that we have the weapons there. So super excited for Curtis Samuel. I think this is a low-key, really good signing. We've seen him be productive all throughout his career, and he had just terrible quarterback play throughout his whole career. I mean, really the best quarterback he played with was tail end of his career, Cam Newton. We saw some stinkers in there, Sam Howell, Tyler Heineke, some dudes that you've heard me talk about on this podcast as guys that I would love to back up Josh Allen. So for being a player that's able to be productive with poor quarterback play, and then you're also talking, decent production last year with Sam Howell on a team that also had Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin on the roster. He can get involved in the running game. He does the jet sweeps. He can be that chain mover for you, with the short area quickness. He's a player that gets separation. All the things adding up of what I love in a receiver. He is a little bit on the small side at 5'11", but I think for me, I think the NFL is kind of shifting away from those, giant, big-bodied receivers that win jump balls. I just don't think you see that as much. And we've seen Josh Allen's best production come from receivers that are able to separate and get some space. Guys like Cole Beasley, Stephon Diggs. We've started seeing it with Shakir. So that's what gets me excited for Curtis Samuel. So just kind of multi-layered there. I think your worst case scenario, he's a viable number 2 option. I think there's still some ceiling to reach into there. Going from, bottom of the barrel quarterback play to one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think, like I said, it's an investment that could be a viable number 2, but isn't such like a knockout number 2. We had to pay him $25 million a year, and now we're handcuffed for the next 5 years. And I think it still leaves the door open for an early significant investment in receiver in the draft. But that's going to wrap it up on tonight's episode. We are inching closer to the draft, so we'll talk more about that as we get closer. And also, still a ton of action to go in free agency. Just kind of take a look at the available free agents out there. There's still a ton of players that could make great contributions on this team. So be patient. Don't get too high and low on this roller coaster ride that's free agency. Too concerned with what Beane has or hasn't done yet. Beane loves going bargain shopping. He's going to be hitting the thrift store like Macklemore. Just be patient. We're going to see some more moves. And make sure you're subscribed so you're hearing us talk about them every week. Like I said, like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, check out the website, wanderingbuff.com, and tune in next week as we talk about more free agency and start working into the draft. As always, go Bills.